Hello there and welcome. I'm Hannah Wyatt and I am chair of BAFTA's television committee. Welcome to the making of Leaving Neverland and Don't Fuck with Cats, Hunting an Internet Killer. This is part of BAFTA Television's The Sessions, which is a series of events that celebrates some of the nominees and nominated programmes from this year's British Virgin Media Academy Television Awards and the BAFTA Craft Awards. These virtual events are part of BAFTA's year-round learning programmes for TV, films and games, which are for audiences all over the place. And you can find out more at BAFTA.org and on BAFTA's social channels. So I'd also like to start by thanking our sponsors, TCL, who are helping bring this to you. So thank you to them. And before we get going, just a bit of housekeeping. So you can join the conversation on social using the hashtag BAFTA TV sessions. You can ask questions. So please send them via the Q&A function in Zoom and they will be moderated through to me later at the end. Closed captioning is also available and you can turn that on at the bottom of your screens now. Finally, I'd like to welcome our speakers. Michael Hart, editor of Don't Fuck with Cats. Hello, Michael.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good, nice to have you with us. Felicity Morris, who's the producer of Don't Fuck with Cats. Hello, Felicity.
Hi.
It's nice to have you here. Mark Lewis, the director, Don't Fuck with Cats. Hello, Mark.
Hi. Hi there, how are you?
I'm very well, nice to have you here. And then from Leaving Neverland, we have Jules Cornell, who edited the two-parter. Hello, Jules.
Hi, Hannah.
And Dan Reed, the director.
Hi, hello.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being with us. I'm going to start by asking you a bit about the origins of both these extraordinary series, which I watched and enjoyed, in fact, rewatched again over the weekend and thought were fantastic. And congratulations on your nominations. And indeed, Michael, on a win, you've already won a Craft BAFTA for editing, so well done, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Just to sort of start at the beginning, so we'll start with you, Felicity and Mark. How did you find this story?
Shall I kick off, Fliss? So we had been looking a lot at sort of internet-based contemporary stories, and I had directed a show a few years back about Silk Road, which was the kind of $5 billion illegal drugs cartel that was on the darknet, and had become really interested in those kind of stories. And it was the story of Luca Magnotta was a story that kind of I vaguely remembered from 2014 in the trial. But it was really when we were looking at these kind of web-based stories which kind of really fascinated myself and Felicity, and we came across this and began to realise it was a sort of a much bigger, a much darker, a much more sort of twisted tale. And it became really appealing to us, really, because already just in the sort of news reporting of it felt like a kind of real life thriller. And when we started digging into it, you know, I think we could see that it was going to be much more than that. It wasn't just a crime story. It was a story that really sort of told you much more about the internet, how we function with the internet, about fame and celebrityhood and all those things. And it became very, very appealing, you know, both as a kind of crime story, but equally as a story that had something more to say. And then when Felicity became involved as Queen of Access, as we call her at Raw Television, where we work, I think, you know, Felicity, you should talk about the access that we got and the people that we came across just made the story so much richer.
Yeah, I think that, you know, when we first started looking into the story itself, it was this, you know, if it was a work of fiction, you wouldn't have believed it was true. So nothing was kind of usual, not least the kind of people that we were going to meet on our kind of wild journey through it. You know, clearly we sort of knew about Luca's crimes, we knew that what he had done, but in digging deeper, we then got to know John Green and Deanna, the two amazing sort of internet sleuths. I mean, they hate being called that, they'd rather be called netizens. And through them, we sort of realised that there was something much bigger that we could kind of be exploring, sort of through their own journey and through the kind of bigger themes that their experience sort of threw up. So I think little did we know when we started the kind of roller coaster journey that we were about to go on.
Well, we'll hear more about that in a second. I mean, obviously, very different for you, Dan, with Leaving Neverland. Very high profile, central character who obviously we don't really hear from in a way. But how did you get involved with this project?
It really, I sort of tripped over it really because at the time I had made several, films like Terror at the Mall and The Paedophile Hunter, which were either sort of immersive observational films where you're in the thick of it, quite long term, and then past tense, like recounting it, retrospectively telling a story of a very complex, detailed terrorist attack in a forensic way. And I remember, and also quite grim subjects. I remember chatting to Daniel Pearl, who's an exec at Channel 4, and me sort of moaning that like, body count was really high in all the films I do. How do I get to do something with less dead people? He's like, well, just apply the same approach to stories that don't involve people getting killed and stuff that people are intrigued by. So I said, well, for instance, what? And he said, well, what about the Michael Jackson controversy? And I didn't know anything about it. Remind me what the controversy is, because I obviously knew that he'd been accused of child molestation. But I sort of just reluctantly really took some development money out from Channel 4, and then we discovered that there was this court case underway with Wade and James, and that no one seemed very interested in it. And so I, long story short, I ended up chatting to their lawyer and flying to LA to meet their lawyer, and they were like, yeah, okay. And I still didn't know what to think. And it wasn't really until Channel 4 gave us a little bit of money, and we went and did the master interviews with Wade and James, and then I realized, oh my God, this is amazing. But it's not about Michael Jackson. It's not just about Michael Jackson, although obviously that's a huge draw, but it was this incredible insight into why sometimes little children have, as grim as it sounds, a sort of sexual/romantic relationship with an adult, and it's a horrible thing to hear about. But that's the truth of what happens. It's what Oprah Winfrey called, the sort of, seduction of children. It's like it's child abuse, but it's also seduction by an adult. So anyway, yeah. So and then from then on we filmed the 2 master interviews, put that into a half-hour reel, which we showed to HBO and Netflix and other people, and then they were very excited. HBO were really excited about it, and we went from there.
And I'm just interested because obviously it starts with the access, as you say, in the beginning of the story. But Michael first, and also Jules, I'll come to you first, Michael. But at what point were you brought onto the project? Because good editors are like gold dust. So was it the minute that they that Dan and Mark and Felicity found these projects, they were on the phone? When did you come into these projects?
I think, Mark might be able to answer this better than I can, because I'm not sure where they were at in the production, but the idea was pretty well formed. I think they were talking to other editors, and I was booked on other stuff. But initially, when the idea came to me, I was like, I didn't want to do it because I was like, this is too dark. I just cannot see a way into this film. And I had worked with Raw, the company, before a few times, and I love working with them. And we just done 3 Identical Strangers, and it was really well received. So I thought, I'm going to have the pick of the bunch now in Raw. And then my executive producer, Dimitri Doganis, came and said, we've got a film we think you'd be interested in. I was like, okay. And he said, it's about a guy who kind of kills cats on YouTube. And I was like, have you got the right number? I'm not sure this is something I can, but then he said to me, he was like, look, take a look at the taster. Yeah. And I saw a bit of the story, not much. I try not to find out too much about anything before I start working on it. You try to discover it in the edit, but they had cut this taster. And then I watched that, and I saw Deanna's interview in the taster. It was like a 3-minute tease, and I thought she was just so amazing, and such a brilliant interview. And the way she spoke, and I thought, okay, there's definitely something in this. And then I spoke to Mark, I think, and he had done a script or a rough kind of outline of the story about what happens in the film, and it was broken into 3 parts, into the 3 episodes that you see. And when I got to the end of the first episode I was like, there's just no way, I cannot do this. And and that's the thing with Deanna, is that and the rest of the contributors as well, that she's such a strong interview, that no matter how light or how dark your subject matter is. If you have the right person telling you the story, they will help you. And I'm big into Hitchcock films and kind of Christopher Nolan stuff, and there was so many kind of twists and turns in this. I was like, I got to maybe just try this out and see what it is. But Deanna was the key for me. It was like, she's kind of the Alice to the Wonderland in the film, you know, somebody who
sort of unlocked it in your mind, and for the film you could see how you could make that work. And Jules, what about for you? Because again, this is an extraordinary story, but not for everyone, you know, to spend a lot of time around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, as Dan said, I've got a kind of track record with some fairly grim material. So
but we worked together on
we worked together.
Jules cut the very first tourism thing that we did.
Yeah. So Dan and I worked together a long time ago, and then I got a call in, I know, towards the end of 2017, I can't remember, maybe sort of autumn, somewhere around there, winter. And Dan kind of said, well, I've got this film that, you know, I'd be interested in hearing what you think. And I said, okay, what's it about? And he's like, I can't tell you. I was like, okay. But we went in and we had a chat. And as Dan said, he'd filmed the sort of master interviews with James and Wade at this point. And had sort of cut them into, I know, a 25 or 30 minute cut of just there. I think there were a couple of photos in there. But it was essentially just their interviews. And he said, okay, sit and watch this after signing a non-disclosure, and tell me what you think. He just left me alone in the room, and I watched it, and it was just sort of mind-blowing. And I watched it again. He sort of popped in. He's like, okay, no, I want to see it again. So I watched it again, and it was just the story of their voice. And I think that's something we tried to sort of capture in the film, that is just honing in on the voice, which is why it's a kind of deceptively simple film. Really, it looks like there's sort of not a lot going on, but it is just so you zone in on these two guys and their families. And so I said, yeah, I'd kind of love to be a part of it. And, you know, they were talking to other people as well. And then I got a call and said, yeah, please start. And
you
so
were
I started in April 2018.
Yeah. I think you've all touched there on contributors, and both projects are so focused around some very specific contributors that drive the narrative through the whole of the episodes. Felicity, you touched on it earlier, but just tell us a little bit more about how you found John and Deanna, and then how you got them on board.
We sort of had been looking into the story for quite a long time before we actually pitched it to Netflix. And that was a relationship that kind of took, I don't know, the best part of sort of months and months and months to develop, not least because obviously they operate behind these pseudonames and hadn't ever sort of spoken to the press using their real names. And indeed, John Green, we still don't know what his real name is. But from kind of our own sleuthing and Google searching and kind of deep internet stalking, we found them and talked to them. And obviously, the first conversations that we had, we just realized that they were such amazing characters, you know, with the kind of real care, and they'd gone on this emotional journey through, you know, across sort of 18 months. You know, Deanna is exactly as you see her on screen. She's kind of like that all the time, 24/7 in real life. And I think both of them really grappled with the kind of sense that Luca obviously was doing the kind of killing videos, and then obviously the murder videos, because he wanted to be famous. And so a lot of the conversations that Mark and I had with them at the beginning was, well, what are we doing? You know, giving him a Netflix platform for his story. And I mean, Mark, you can take over to sort of say sort of how we brought them around and how we kind of convinced them that actually this wasn't about Luca and this was about something much more.
I mean, I think it was very, you know, it was integral to gaining access to them that we tackle head on that issue. You know, are we giving a platform to Luca? And really, I think in conversations with Deanna and John Green, you know, we arrived at what we felt was a comfortable position, which was, you know, looking at the complicity of every person who reads a crime story in a newspaper, or who watches a horror film, or who reads a crime novel, you know, crime and murder is something that we're all fascinated in. I mean, everybody on this panel will have done, as you know, as Dan and Jules say, you know, worked on grim subjects. We're sort of fascinated by these things. And in a sense, you know, it was part of the story that we're all, whether as filmmakers or viewers, sort of complicit in this fascination with true crime, fascination with murder. And that was, you know, one of the reasons behind why Luca had turned to murder, or turned to, you know, moved from killing animals to murdering someone online, was because he knew that there was this sort of love and this audience for murder and for crime. And so suddenly it was a very dark but an extraordinary kind of backstory behind the whole film. And we decided that, you know, we had to tackle that head on, which is why we did what we call a complicity ending at the end, which is when Deanna, our protagonist, having taken you through this incredible roller coaster of film and sort of opened herself up to us and told us all about the twists and turns of her hunting this guy, but then asking that central question at the end. You know, was John Green, were the sleuths that had tracked him down and hunted him for so many months in part responsible for pushing him forward to do darker things? And are we as filmmakers and are we as audiences who watch crime documentaries also in part complicit? We decided to tackle it completely head on, and I think that was really the right decision. I mean, I think we were blessed with Deanna Thompson, who is the most extraordinary protagonist, by far the best interviewee I've ever had the pleasure to interview and ever will, I'm sure. But we couldn't have got that ending, I don't think, without her, because she really understood at its core, you know, what we were doing and what we had to say. So thankfully, that complicity ending was really sort of her making.
And so did you have this, you'd already been to Netflix with the idea and before you got access to your contributors, or had you got your contributors on board? Just a sort of quick answer to that, because then I want to move on to sort of something else. But
no, we had access pretty much. I think when you go into Netflix these days, I mean, we feel more comfortable when you've got the entire deck of cards. I mean, this series would have been nothing without those internet sleuths. I know they don't like that term, the internet sleuths. You know, they are the backbone of the film. And without the Montreal police, you know, who gave you the kind of the real world detection. Had we not had all of those pieces, I don't think we'd been comfortable about presenting it to Netflix. Never mind Netflix saying, yes, we'd like to do it. So we really went in with pretty much the full deck of cards, I think, apart from Luca's mother, who we only got in the middle in the course of the production, but everybody else we had.
Yeah. And it sounds like it was sort of a bit the other way around for you. You were having that conversation with Channel 4. They planted the seed of the idea, and then you went away and met the contributors and then realised there was a real compelling story there.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of brief Channel 4 gave us was really, really general. We had no idea if there was going to be anything special in it at all. And they tripped over these two amazing contributors. And then I said to Channel 4, we can't, you've got to commission this, you know, because these two guys aren't going to speak to us like on development. They're not going to, you know, these are like multi-day interviews, and no one's going to really sort of pour their hearts out, you know, just for development. So it has to be commissioned. And yeah, so Channel 4 were like first in, and then, you know, once we had those two interviews, then we went straight to HBO, because really those two interviews were the key to everything. And then I mean, for me, the mums was super important, and the mums came on a bit later. But if we hadn't had the mums, I don't think we would have had such a strong film.
Well, it's so integral, isn't it, to the sort of as a viewer. Certainly, you're so sort of I don't think you could have. I think you're right. You wouldn't. You're so desperate to know what the parents were thinking at this point into it. I mean, we'll talk a bit more about the other footage you brought in. Obviously, in both different projects, very different. But while we're talking about contributors, I mean, obviously, many of these contributors were vulnerable for various reasons. I mean, clearly with the two guys who'd had this relationship with Michael Jackson, and then equally with the very secretive contributors that you were working with on Don't Fuck with Cats. Dan, just tell us a little bit, to start with you, you know, how do you approach working with those relationships initially and bringing people on board and thinking through how you're going to look after them, which I think is increasingly something we as an industry have to think about all the time. It gets more and more complex.
Yeah, I mean the kind of the seed idea for both Wade and James, the reason why their motivation for taking part was maybe a film like this, because so many people will watch it, will help other people who've been through the same thing, and that's happened. You know, a lot of people who have either been molested as kids or whose children have suffered that kind of crime, been victims of that kind of crime, have come to us and said how much it's helped. So that was a big motivation for them. It's like, let's do this not just to get our story out there, but in case if it can help other people. So I think that was quite a strong kind of thing we could all hang on to. In terms of James was I think, you wouldn't mind me saying this, more fragile than Wade. Wade had done a lot of therapy and had really sort of thought through things and was in a way the instigator of, where he was the instigator of the court case against the Jackson companies, which is still going on, by the way. And James kind of joined later and has done less sort of work on himself. So yeah, we were concerned about what's going to happen to these guys and their mums when the film comes out, when everybody in the street kind of knows what they look like and what the story is. HBO were very, very much all over this because obviously the sort of the key place was the United States for this story and any impacts that were going to any backlash on the guys and their mums. So HBO put a massive amount of resources and psychotherapists and stuff and made people available. But in the end, James and Wade and their mums were kind of pretty self-sufficient and had really done a lot of the thinking. I think they found the interviews. Certainly Wade found the interview, this long 3-day interview that we did in sort of human language, not in therapy speak and not in lawyer speak. He found it to be incredibly cathartic, and I think he said it had a transformative effect on him. So we went in there knowing that it wasn't walking on eggshells. They weren't super fragile, but we just had to be careful to protect them from any premature sort of backlash. They were expecting a backlash as soon as the film went out, but then as soon as it was accepted at Sundance, then all the stuff started. But Wade and James just stayed off social media, and so did their mums, and I think that's the key to it. Most of the stuff comes at you on like Twitter and Facebook.
And how long after, with those safeguarding issues on this project, how long after did you keep that dialogue going with them? Have they needed? It sounds like they were fairly self-sufficient in some ways. Clearly, they've done a lot of work already on this, but
yeah. I still talk to them a lot, and we're actually doing another film with them now. But yeah, I still I guess the sort of long tail of the sort of duty of care was like 3 months, really sort of quite engaged, and then thereafter I check in with them quite a bit. Oprah coming on board was a big thing again. Just the fact that what they've been through now had this extra meaning because it was part of something that a lot of people could relate to and might help a lot of people. I think that was a tremendous boost for them. What happened then was when the adrenaline and the drama and the excitement of that faded, and this often happens in documentaries, when the adrenaline fades, then people are sometimes left going, what now? And I think there's always an element of that, and if you can anticipate that and you can talk about it before it happens, I think that really helps.
And I think that happens in all sorts of programmes, whether it's documentaries or reality shows, it's the same thing, that burst. Felicity and Mark, just thinking about contributors, I mean, you've touched on the fact that they weren't sure about whether they should do this film or not. Did you find you had to prepare both your two key contributors in any, I'm talking about Deanna and John, really, for what they were going to do and what that would mean in terms of putting themselves out there, as you say, revealing their identities or not, in John's case?
I think once they've made the decision to participate, they were just fully on board. I mean, with any film, absolutely, and this is obviously an industry-wide thing, you have a tremendous duty of care to every contributor. And of course, we approached that really responsibly and talked about, what the exposure for them would be or could be. Once they were on board, though, they were fully committed. I mean, Deanna Thompson is a huge kind of documentary fan. She sort of knows the languages of documentary, which was extremely helpful, actually, because I think that it just made her prepared. But, a bit like Dan's film, you interview these people, you interview your protagonists for day. With Deanna, it was 2 days. And that's a kind of grueling thing. I mean, she existed on a diet of energy drinks and things like that. So was constantly drinking the Red Bulls and smoking cigarettes in between takes, and that kept her going. But it was, a marathon run for them. I think weirdly, what was sort of strange was that those two were sort of in a way more prepared sort of naturally, I think. I think what we had perhaps not appreciated fully was just how the story affected everybody else. I mean, the lead detective, Claudette Hammond from the Montreal Police, as you'll remember, kind of broke down in the interview, which was, entirely sort of unexpected that, a senior police officer would break down like that. We were obviously really surprised, and it was because she was really reliving the moment of seeing the murder video for the first time and realizing that she was not only a kind of detective at the scene of the crime, but she was suddenly almost like a witness to the murder as well. And her remembering that was an extremely kind of traumatic moment for her in the middle of the interview. So we realized that, we have a duty of care. I think you can kind of somewhat glibly do sort of interviews with detectives and think it's, that they're sort of somehow super professional people that don't have a heart. Of course, that's not true at all. Everybody is human and everybody has a heart. And I'm very, very grateful that she allowed herself to be sort of shown as vulnerable as she was, because it was a very humanizing moment. Equally with Luca's mother, I think, again, firstly, you can tell the story about how we got her to participate, but really, we had with her, didn't we? We had after her after the interview as well.
I mean, she had never spoken to the media before, even, at the time of Luca being arrested and so on. She had the press pounding on her door, and she just kind of went underground after that, and I think didn't engage in properly sort of in what her son had done, but then also in wanting to speak to the press, she just didn't want to have anything to do with it. So whether it's that enough time had passed by the time that we contacted her. I mean, fortunately, Mark and I went on a big recce together and actually met all of the sort of all of the main characters off camera, just having a cup of tea. And she agreed to kind of meet both Mark and I. We met her in a sort of a Tim Hortons coffee shop, just about, so she lives sort of just outside of Toronto. And I think Mark and I are actually sort of as nervous as she was in, not really knowing much about her not knowing much about us. And I just think, we worked, she's quite gently and patiently with her, and then talked her through sort of what the interview would involve, talked her through the fact that she would very much be a kind of a lone voice in the film, that nobody else believed, the kind of story about Manny. Nobody else was going to stick up for Luca. She was going to be the only person to sort of do that. And then even, afterwards, I mean, we still speak to her now, but certainly in the lead up to it coming out on Netflix, we talked her through exactly what was in each of the three films. We spent hours on the phone with her, didn't we, Mark? So that there just wouldn't be any surprises. And then when it went out on air, we then called her afterwards to see how she was doing. And, throughout COVID, you check in on these people just to sort of
when we checked in on her when the film was out, she was actually really pleased with the series, though she was the lone voice, sort of the spokesperson for Luca in some ways. She was really happy with how she was presented, and she thought it was as fair as it could be. But one thing that did happen actually after the release of the film, one thing that was really unexpected for us, and that we couldn't have prepared Deanna Thompson for, was just how sort of famous she became as a contributor, as a protagonist afterwards. I mean, she was so good and such a lively contributor that in Las Vegas, where she lives, she was being recognized on the street, recognized in the casino. People where she worked, people were writing in saying, "You're a star. I'm bringing an entire conference to your casino." She's a great big ice hockey fan. The cameras found her in the audience. They had her right up in the Jumbotron screen. Hey, she became a sort of celebrity, but just because she was such a good interviewee.
Yeah, amazing. Just to kind of move on to kind of how you think, because they're very based around interviews. Obviously, there's other footage, and we'll come to that and bring, you know, those just in a second a bit more with that. But I mean, Dan, I was just going to ask you, how much did the interviews shape what you were going to do, and how much did you sort of bring ahead of the interviews, if you like? How did that process of telling the story and seeing how the film would evolve, and then who else you needed to bring into that? And obviously the parents, but
yeah, I didn't really have too many thoughts about how to structure the film before the interview, because, like, you know, the sort of I guess the way the interview happens.
yeah.
First of all, I had no idea whether these guys were telling the truth or whether they were for real. And as the interviews went on, I became more and more interested and kind of found them more and more believable. But there was a hell of a lot of sort of checking and cross-checking and corroborating to do. But, you know, what I got them to, I remember talking to Wade and saying, look, because I had lunch with him in Hawaii, and then we did the interview, I think, the next day. But I said, look, I need you to you know, just eliminate all the sort of, I can't remember quite how I put it to him, but eliminate all the sort of therapy speak and you know, all the language that in which he'd wrapped his experience while speaking to a therapist, and while sort of kind of conversing with himself, I suppose, about how to get better from this experience. I think we need to eliminate all that and just speak to me, you know, just as just someone who knows nothing about therapy or law or anything like that. Just speak to me in the simplest possible way. And I think so. And then also I said, can you unfold the story chronologically? And I think that in a way really almost set the structure, because James and Wade's relationships with Jackson actually overlapped. So what you had was a story that began in the 80s, and then, you know, obviously James was first, and then Wade came along. But there were and Jules and I think Jules, we tried to sort of tell one part of the story out of sequence, just because I think we were worried that we were going to spend far too long with James. But in the end, we decided to unravel that and just stick to the chronology. So it was a very chronological. Is that right, Jules?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, there was a thing that James's story, you know, because we wanted to unravel the details, and the detail is sort of the king of the story, and sort of drawing you in and understanding not just what happened, but why it happened, or, you know, why it was allowed to happen. And so there was a point of sort of, well, because James was sort of earlier, that his story would go along, you know, for, I don't know, I think the first cut was like sort of 40 minutes of James before Wade would actually kind of enter the film. And, you know, is that a problem kind of structurally? So we did have I know, probably spent about a week or something where we thought, okay, well, we can move some of these elements and perhaps address things more thematically rather than chronologically. But then Dan and I looked at it and kind of quickly realized you just need to understand the step-by-step process, because, you know, each event has a consequence. And if you mess with the chronology, you don't understand how the boys were being drawn into this world, or the parents were being drawn into this world. And you need the viewer to do that, to either, you know, to have, to understand their situation. So it was pretty quickly discounted, and chronology was king, really.
It's amazing to what degree chronology is king. I think a documentary, you know, we're always trying to think, you know, I've been doing this for decades now, and putting films together, and you always try and go, oh, let's do something really clever here, where we do like a flashback or a dog leg, or let's try and organize the film differently. And you pretty much invariably end up going back to chronology. And so I would say to, you know, people watching who want to, you know, if you want to, and I'm pretty sure you would have found the same, Michael and Mark, with putting together Don't Fuck with Cats, because human beings understand and draw meaning from events through chronology when it's ordered, because what happened before what is so important, what led to what is so important. So you very rarely get away from it. So you might as well just put your film together chronologically. Although
Well,
I just film I'm editing at the moment, I started doing that, and then it turned out to be the wrong thing to do.
well, look, I think that's interesting because I think there's slightly more doglegging or slightly more, not sleight of hand in Don't Fuck with Cats, because there's things you hold back a little bit, aren't there, more in that film, arguably?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying it's interesting that you it's not quite the same, I don't think.
It was very, that film though, Don't Fuck with Cats, is very chronological for the 3 episodes. The thing that moved around most was Anna's story. I think that backstory, at what point does Anna, his mum, come in? That was it used to be in episode 1, and then we had a viewing and they kept, you know, we're not ready for that story yet, and we pushed it back to episode 2, and story was just so compelling, and Dan's right, it's just like the order of events that happen in the film, you just never want it to stop and break away from it. Sometimes in films you do that where you think, I think we need a breather here. Well, for some reason in this story we were like, just let this go like a train, never let it stop. And the only time we decided to drop in Anna's story was the point at which she came into the story naturally, which was when the police started knocking on her door and maybe started questioning her as to what happened. And then it allowed you to go into her backstory, so it felt more natural. But no, I think same Chronology is King in doc, especially the retrospective style documentaries where you have interviews telling you the story. I mean, visually we're very tricksy. We use a lot of tricks, but in terms of the order of events, I think it's fairly straightforward, you know.
Although you held back the lawyer, didn't you? Because he could have come in arguably a bit earlier, arguably.
No, you're right. He did get held back. He did get held back, and that's because, you know, his story was the one that seeded the idea of Manny, the Luca's alibi character. So we had to hold that back, and it was a layer of complexity, I think, that people wouldn't have understood had you kept to the strict chronology there. You're quite right. So we did hold back. And because we wanted that, you know, basically the idea there was, it's a bit like a kind of Gone Girl thriller. You know, you follow the thriller up to a point, and then you do go back in time and see something suddenly from Luca's perspective.
Yeah.
Like suddenly, you know, going to, you know, the woman's perspective in Gone Girl, you know, and it was a way of sort of subverting the chronological story that you know, and your understanding of the truth. Yes, you're quite right. In a way, too, our inspiration to do that was because we always intended for this to be a thriller. It's a documentary, it's got interviews, but we wanted to craft it as a thriller. And of course, there are an incredible number of twists and turns naturally in this story anyway, but in kind of classic thriller storytelling, you need at some point to sort of subvert the truth. You need at some point to do a huge big twist where you say, oh, a whole lot of what you've seen already might not be true. And that was the twist with the lawyer. You're quite right.
Yeah, well, and it worked very well. I mean, it was totally justifiable. Obviously, it was just slightly different to doing that very linear structure, obviously, that is much more true of Leaving Neverland. I mean, you touched on it there, Mark. I was going to ask, I mean, incredible twists and turns legally, hundreds of contributors you must have been sifting through. You know, how did you work as a team? I mean, it's hard because you have to speak individually, but when you're thinking about who you're interviewing, who you then include in the film, were there any massive legal sort of cul-de-sacs that you went down, or story cul-de-sacs that you went down in this story?
I mean, I think the legal issues really sort of, you know, obviously the trial had taken place, you know, the conviction happened, so we knew that. Although much that we revealed, everything about the animal abuse story was never covered in the trial. You know, the trial had concentrated on convicting him the murder and used the forensic evidence for the murder. So much of what we were telling was a kind of new story, and we were telling, and again, hence the chronology, why we stuck largely to chronology, because we were trying to show the evolution of a kind of psychopathic killer. You know, we all read crime novels, we all know about Silence of the Lambs, we all know about serial killers, how they evolve from killing animals and narcissistic behavior until they murder someone. And so that was another reason why we kept to the chronology. But a large part of the first episode had not really been given that much press attention or been covered in any trial. So sort of our legal eyes were really on that. And of course, you know, these were all the Facebook group that had been responsible for hunting Luca while he was an animal abuser. you know, it was this huge kind of document. It was, I mean, tens of thousands of pages that largely Michael and Felicity had to sift through to find the gold. But there were lots of legal issues there because, you know, this was a huge public forum where people were saying often very defamatory things, not necessarily about Luca, but about people who they were accusing of being animal abusers, and they were the wrong people. They were, you know, they were accusing the wrong suspects. So there were all sorts of legal issues there that we had to grapple with.
You had to be careful of.
Yeah, defamation and fairness issues. So that was a real minefield, actually.
Yeah. I mean, obviously very different for you, Dan. I mean, it was a decision presumably to tell the story just from the boy's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the documentary revolves around what happened between Michael Jackson and these children. And so, unfortunately, he's not around. You know, so we obviously would have loved to interview him. You know, we were accused of making a one-sided film, but in fact, it's not one-sided because there's, you know, we looked into the archives and tried to put in as much material as we could find from Jackson's previous criminal case and from in '93 when he was accused of child molestation and then paid off the victim. But you know, during those events, he and his lawyers said a whole lot of stuff that we repurposed to express his side's view that he was innocent and that nothing happened and it was preposterous and that people were lying. And you know, so Jules, I think we were at pains to put in counterbalancing voices and not have it just be one-sided. But in the end, you know, what happened behind those closed doors between the little boy and the King of Pop, you know, there weren't many people who could speak to that. There was no point in interviewing a lawyer or a family member because they had absolutely no credibility as an eyewitness. You know, we're talking about a crime that happens behind closed doors. You need to interview the witnesses to that crime in order to have to do something journalistically meaningful. There's no point saying, was Michael Jackson a nice guy? You know, asking his mum, do you think he would ever have molested children? Well, of course she's going to say no. So that's not really meaningful in journalistic terms. What is meaningful is you know, trying to put together the picture of these two families, and you know, their accounts were incredibly consistent. We did a lot of background research, and you know, to this day, no one's ever found anything that could undermine what James and Wade are saying, or the other side try and undermine their credibility. But yeah, it would, you know, it's a film that is necessary, and that, you know, prosecuting child molestation, you encounter the same problem in that, you know, you only have there's no material evidence. There's no body fluids. There's nothing left, and the victim often only discloses the crime much later, and that's part of a well-established pattern that people who prosecute these kind of crimes understand really well. So it's very difficult. You don't have the smoking gun. You don't have a body. You know, what you have is these accounts that you have to test for consistency and credibility. And you know.
And I think that, you know, something that we, you know, didn't want the film to be, it wasn't retrying those, you know, the Geordie Chandler and the Gavin Alviso cases. We weren't sort of trying to gather, you know, every kind of witness to those and lawmakers and prosecutors and so on, and retry those cases now.
In fact, we decided not to, didn't we, Jules? I interviewed quite a number of people associated with the criminal case and the investigation. We decided not to use it.
Yeah, and so, you know, but the whole film wasn't to kind of redo those trials or those, you know, those legal cases. And, you know, as we were putting the film together, the most interesting thing from, you know, my point of view, and Dan and I then, you know, talked about this, was the family story, and, you know, and just focusing in on their experience. And it's not kind of trying to prove, you know, the guilt of Michael Jackson. It's about understanding sort of the legacy and the pattern of abuse and how it affected these two boys and their families.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why the focus stays on them, rather than having, you know, a cast of thousands to kind of say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Yeah. Because that's not what the film's trying to get to the bottom of. It's trying to understand the impact of that relationship on two children.
both of these projects deal with, I mean, you've touched on it really eloquently there, really disturbing situations. One's about child abuse, which is awful. One's about a murder that happens sort of not live on air, but which is then videoed and shared. And I just was going to bring you in at this point, Michael, particularly because I found watching, you must have had to look at all that material. How do you balance that out when you're in the edit? You know, when you're in the edit watching all that stuff, I often think about these things. You know, it's really hard. Does it take a personal toll was one of the things I wanted to ask. We'll talk more about the craft of the edit, but I'm just interested because they are dark subjects. You're spending a lot of time with it.
Yeah.
Often, you know, just you looking at stuff. That must have been quite tricky.
It was. I mean, Mark warned me at the start about the video, both. I mean, there's about 4 or 5 kind of videos in there that were very difficult to watch, but I put it off for as long as possible. I knew where they'd be in the film, but I decided not to watch them until I absolutely needed to, mainly because I didn't want to be desensitized to it, because if I watched it too much, I would have started putting more in. I would have lost any perspective. And I actually haven't watched all the videos fully through, like especially the murder videos. I just didn't watch. I only got what I needed to put in the film, anything that was just relevant, because we didn't want to be gratuitous with this. There had to be a purpose to literally we went through frame by frame what we needed in this film and to try and justify it. But yeah, I mean, Jules can speak to this as well as an editor. When I've worked on some other things, and in an edit, you don't think it affects you in the edit because you kind of, it's part of the job and you do it, but you do take it home, and I think it can affect you a bit more than it should. But you know, you've just got to try and turn off when you go home and just switch. It can be difficult, but in this case, it was hard. It was really, really hard, like, because the nature of what was in those videos.
I mean, I think
sorry, carry on, Jules.
Well, I think it's sort of the nature of, you know, the subject matter that, you know, documentaries tend to focus on. They tend to be fairly kind of grim stories. So I think, you know, when you sort of do this for a living, you're exposed to, you know, a number of kind of, you know, really unpleasant kind of things from, you know, a variety of subjects.
I was just going to ask about sort of the whole production process and a bit more. I'm just mindful of time and sort of keep moving through some things, so we get to some questions from the audience as well. Mark and Felicity, how long was the whole process? Were you filming and editing at the same time? You obviously talked about you'd secured all your contributors up front. You'd clearly thought about the sort of narrative structure of the film. How did that sort of interweaving of production go? You know, was Michael already in the edit, or did you shoot everything and then pass it over?
We shot all the interviews. Right, so we did a big recce trip sort of in the June of 2018, and then we were sort of scripting at the same time, and then we then shot for sort of 3 weeks. We did a sort of a North America shoot with all of our North American interviewees, and then came back for a week and then went over to Europe and did all of those interviews. And then Michael sort of started, so that was sort of September, October, November, then Michael started in the December, and then the edit went sort of all the way through till the summer, really, the following year. But then we had a break where we shot more sort of visuals, and a bit more with some of our sort of main characters as well.
And while you were in that process, Mark, how much did things change and evolve? Because they often do on these sorts of projects, don't they? You obviously went in with a very clear sense of story, but then you get it into the edit, you've met your contributors, you brought in other people.
I had written, so my sort of process is to write kind of pretty extensive treatments. They're sort of more than treatments, less than scripts. And structurally, I think pretty much the story we laid out, we kept that structure largely. I think the things that changed in the edit were the fact that we really dived into these kind of Facebook groups, that archive, and really that was Michael's doing. You know, it was a tremendous amount of work to, you know, make those internet pages have as much drama as they did. And I think, you know, we always knew it was a good archive, but we didn't realize just how dramatic it was going to be. So that sort of drama quotient really, really got up in the edit, thanks to Michael. I think, you know, some other things did change. Structurally, our third episode probably changed the most, and we played around that with the most. And that was partly because the difficulty of crafting the ending and having this kind of usual suspects ending, where all the clues, all the breadcrumb clues that we had seeded all the way through the series suddenly sort of came together at the end, was, you know, a real feat of editing. And so that took a lot more work. And there were things that only came up in the production, the course of production, that, you know, some of which we didn't have till the very end. For example, I mean, you know, that the ending was basically that Luca had been creating in his murder video a kind of homage to Basic Instinct. There were things like the key ring that the mother brought to our interview with her, which, you know, we didn't know about until she suddenly brought it, which was the smoking gun, and the interrogation tapes of Luca when he's being interrogated by the Montreal police after he'd been captured in Berlin, and where he crossed his legs and asked for a cigarette just like Sharon Stone. Those were tapes that we only got, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the edit. We'd been over to Montreal to film a little bit of pickup filming and to see the Montreal police, just to kind of tell them exactly what was in the film. And it was then that they gave us those tapes. So those kind of things were really, really what changed in the edit at the very last moment.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I know what this
Go for it.
I'm just curious about how much of the, and I don't know how candid you can be, but how much of the script that you wrote, Mark, and perhaps if you and Felicity wrote it together, how useful was that for you in the edit, Michael?
So useful. Like, it kind of key to the process, because usually when you come onto a project, you're trying to figure out what the story is, and then we spend so much time in the edit. Basically, you get about 2 weeks at the end of a lot of projects, finessing or even storytelling. But by the time you get there, you're so tired, and you're just glad you've got a story in order. But Mark had cracked the story before we came into the edit so well, and he'd written it so well, and he had such good kind of, and Felicity as well, they developed such a good rapport with their characters that our interviews were singing as well. So everything was in place, and my job was literally, how do we tell this story? Not what's the story, how do we tell it? And that was just so liberating, like, and it doesn't happen that often, and it kind of shows in the film. I think you can tell that there's been real thought into how we tell it. But I mean, initially I didn't even want to do the internet stuff. I remember because I was so enamored with Diana's interview, I was like, this film is just going to be her interview with some archive and that's it. And Mark was like, no, I think you're wrong. I think there's something to be done here with the storytelling. And he said that in a previous film that he'd worked on, Silk Road, I think they'd used a few of these techniques before and with his previous editor. And I think if ever there's a way to turn an editor off an idea, it's to tell you that you did it with the previous editor. So I was like, I'm not doing it. But then I was home in Donegal. I have a sister, she's like 16 years old, and I saw her surf the internet on her phone, and she's just whizzing through it and jumping from app to page to app and like and comment. And I was like, Mark's right, like that's the pace, that's the way to do this. Like, so then I remember going back into the edit suite and thinking, I need to talk to the graphics guy because he's going to have to renegotiate his contract. We need to get him in here now. You know what I mean? It's a different beast. I'd never cut anything like that before, but yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of work, but it just was kind of creatively, it was very liberating.
And it was quite amazing, wasn't it, when we sort of all in the edit and you were creating those graphics, doing those quick time records.
Yeah.
And at the moment when Luke is about to sort of, when he's uploaded a sort of another kitten killing video, and Michael would sort of screen record, you know, the cursor about to sort of click, watch, and it's kind of like you're watching, you know, one of those like classic someone's at home alone horror movies, and you're going, don't open the door, don't open the door.
It was Hitchcock. So,
you got that feeling. I felt like that. I really felt like that. Jules, I'm going to ask you the same question. What did Dan give you then? So Mark gave Michael, Mark and Felicity gave Michael a well-honed script. What did Jules, what did Dan give you in the edit when you first got there?
Absolutely.
Gave me a bunch of rushes and said I'll be back in 9 months. It was, yeah, I mean, I sort of like, I think I don't like to know an awful lot from the director initially, when you're dealing with a kind of sensitive subject, or I don't know, probably anything really, because I think, you know, the director or the producer has sort of gone out and got a relationship with people and convinced them to take part in the film, and, you know, met them and sort of wooed them into sort of their involvement, and then shot it. And then, you know, for you know, Michael and I, all we've got, or they, you know, they created their own stuff, but, you know, all we've got is what's on camera. And I think sort of judging not you know, that interesting thing that was said over dinner during one conversation, but did they say it on camera, and how did that play? And what do I think of the contributor? And, you know, as Dan sort of mentioned earlier, as sort of that he was sort of talking with Wade and James, and, you know, did he believe their story? And, you know, sort of getting into that, I wanted a kind of an unfiltered view of what I thought about them and whether I was convinced with their story. So I didn't want Dan to kind of say, oh, there's this and this, and these are the important moments. And I think, you know, you have to kind of decide, you know, where those kind of, you know, story beats kind of land. So I sort of watched it kind of unfiltered and started putting it together, and then, you know, talked to Dan, you know, as we went along about kind of, you know, what we thought was important. And I think, you know, we largely agreed. I don't think there was any kind of major sort of moment during sort of the, you know, the first assembly of the film where it was kind of like, no, that's, you know, we've got to do something different. I think we had a pretty consistent kind of view of the story.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in many senses, what was a real gift for us was the simplicity of the story. It had a real true, you know, it's a story told by 4 characters, basically, you know, with a few others who come in now and again. And it's a chronological story, and it's focused on one thing that those 4 characters have in common.
Yeah.
And so that gave it a great deal of simplicity and power. And then what Jules did is he did a fantastic, very such a sensitive job in really sort of getting under the skin of these 4 characters and bringing in all the details you said earlier, that really kind of the nuance that allowed you to understand what psychologically had driven these children and these mums into the arms of Michael Jackson. And I think, you know, that was really challenging. Yeah. But it was incredibly, you know, it was a quite a simple proposition. Don't Fuck With Cats is a different category, I guess, of stories. Yeah.
I want to make sure we get to some of the questions asked by people. Sorry, just to interrupt you there, Dan. I'm just mindful of time, and lots of people have been posting questions, so I do just want to be able to ask some of them. This first one is probably for you, Mark or Felicity. Did you ask Diana to say the ending to camera, or did she just do it herself? It was very effective, the questioner asks.
We obviously talked to Diana a lot before we interviewed her. I mean, on the phone initially, and then we met her, and we spent hours with her going through the story, making sure that we got all the story beats. The ending, the idea that, you know, why are they doing this, and, you know, in what ways are we all complicit, was something that we talked about with her a lot. It was one of the reasons that we made that she decided to do it. So we talked about what was the right thing to say, what she should say, and we kind of workshopped that together. But Diana is just so extraordinary that, you know, that, whatever you would call it, that I don't want to call it a performance. It wasn't a performance because it's real. That is her.
That's,
you know,
just the way she is.
I said, I think you should turn to camera and address the audience directly and look them, you know, direct in the eye. So I think, you know, I directed that moment. But what she said, and I think we did a number of takes on it, but it was the one that was truly her, truly in her, you know, her own words, effing and blinding, was the one that we used, just because that was really, really her.
Yeah. I've got a very specific one here for you, Dan. How did you decide the shots for the contributor interviews, and did they have the impact you hoped?
Well, yeah, I think I was pleased with the way I shot the interviews. I actually, it was you know, the combination of the A camera in a kind of low wide, and then the B camera in a really high raking shot across, like 3/4 across the front. That's something I developed on a film called From Russia with Cash, kind of almost accidentally. that I was looking for a way to shoot the two-camera interview interestingly, and it's become, I guess, my go-to combination of framing for every interview I do now. Maybe I should switch it up now. It's probably getting boring pretty early. But yeah, and I was really pleased because you get the real intimacy in the beat shot. You're really on the inside of the character, and it feels like you're with the person, and then you can go back to the wider shot for a little more distance. How did you find them, Jules? What did you think?
Well, I mean, I think it was exactly that. With having the two cameras, obviously, kind of makes it easier to cut without having to sort of disappear and use cutaways. But it was sort of establishing a grammar so that the wide shot would sort of be someone telling the plot exposition, as it were, and then we would only use the close-up when you were kind of inside somebody's mind. So it was I think there's two instances in the 4 hours where that doesn't happen, just for necessity, but generally we sort of imposed a grammar ourselves on kind of when you would be wide and when you would be close, as to so the camera's doing different jobs. But they're it's very much part of Dan's look. I think if you look at his films, they're all
clearly, he's just admitted it's the only shots he ever uses, Dan.
I can't find a pair of shots that work as well.
Because the tripod's stuck at an angle. It needs.
Stuck at an angle. I've got a question now from Mark here specifically. The question is, how did you strike the balance between authentic storytelling and sensationalist/journalistic storytelling? I think that's the sort of balance between a real story and the drama that you alluded to earlier. How did you feel you struck that balance?
I think, we were always very conscious that we didn't want this to be like serial killer porn. And we didn't want it to be sensationalist in that way, though it is a murder that was very sensationally covered at the time in the press. We didn't want it to be like that because we thought the story had something much more important to say about our relationship with the internet, about the rise of internet vigilantism, which is really a kind of force that's here to stay, about complicity, about our quest for celebrityhood, all those kind of things. So it was very much our approach that right from the beginning that there should be a kind of, several themes that would come out of the story, but that they should come out of the story organically. And the story itself, I mean, we didn't, as Felicity said right at the beginning, you couldn't have scripted it better in a sense, more as a thriller. It was a thriller. The hunt for Luca Magnotta by the internet sleuths was a cat and mouse hunt. To the point that at some points, the hunters became the hunted. That was all really there. So it was very naturally a kind of thriller story. So I think, it was just about trying to find the right balance that, keeping you constantly riveted to the screen, but allowing the sort of bigger themes to come organically out of the story. But obviously you have to keep an eye on that balance. Hopefully we got there in the end.
And then this is a question, Felicity, you might be able to help with this. Someone says they're working on a documentary themselves. How do you go about your sort of scripting, storyboarding, especially in pre-production stage of a documentary? So I think that's really about the planning of a documentary. Do you have any tips?
I mean, I think the script really comes from the conversations that we have with contributors. So I would spend sort of, with most people, a really long time on the phone with them, hearing, every sort of beat of their story, and then, almost kind of pre-interviewing them, I guess. And then that can then be worked into a sort of an interview script, so that before we go into interview people, we sort of know what they're going to say. I mean, there were people who we on purpose sort of didn't make them go there, didn't kind of get them to sort of speak about the kind of more horrible parts of their story, because you don't want to make them go over and over and over them again. But with most of the people, we did sit and hear the story all the way through, which is sort of hours of conversations, and then working all of that into the script.
That's great. Well, listen, I'm going to have to wrap up because we're running out of time. But I just want to say I'm sorry I couldn't get through everyone's questions that they asked. There was a lot to get through because they're both fascinating projects. So thank you to our speakers, and congratulations again on your nominations and indeed your win, Michael. And thank you again to our supporting partner, which is TCL. To the audience, I really hope you've enjoyed it. You can join the conversation on BAFTA's social channels, and you can stay tuned for details of where you can watch the Virgin Media British Academy Television Awards, which are on TV soon. The next event in the series is Actors in Conversation, Leading Actress, on Monday the 27th of July at 5 p.m. and you can visit BAFTA.org to register. And you can catch up with sessions from this series at BAFTA Guru YouTube channel. So thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and for your time this evening, and see you all soon. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks.